Welcome back, Jenny. Hi, how are you?
Very well. How are you, Alvin?
I'm doing good too. I'm excited to have our fourth episode going out today.
Come on.
But one of our last episodes, we mentioned the idea of brand messaging and messaging in general and how important it is for whether if it's marketing leaders or founders to know the messaging they're using and whether if it's reaching that golden nugget of a customer. And when we say brand messaging, what exactly, well, to you, what do you think we're referring to when we say brand messaging and the components that founders and marketing leaders should really be paying attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with your why.
Yeah,
What is it about you? Like, why? Why you? Why your service? Why your product? I think a lot of businesses can't articulate that really well.
yeah,
They can articulate it using lots and lots of words and go around lots of different, houses, but they can't actually say in a very simple statement, this is our why. And I think if you haven't got that nailed down, it ricochets across all of your messaging being a bit vague and being, not really honed in on your ideal customer. So I think the starting point for anyone thinking about their messaging is, are you really communicating your why? And do your team really understand your why? Because one of the things I notice when I do these brand strategy workshops
yeah,
is everyone's got a rough idea. Like, it's very rare to have a senior leadership team like really disjointed. But what often strikes me is the lack of depth and the lack of real knowledge on things like your value proposition, on things like your ideal customer, um, your brand pillars, what you really stand
yeah.
for. A lot of the time, it's not that people don't know, it's that it hasn't been really formally finalised. And so everyone's not pulling in the same direction. Everyone's pulling in a variation of what they think it is. And that's where often branding becomes quite messy quite quickly. And then your messaging becomes diluted. It
Yeah.
doesn't become really targeted. So I think often it's not having that really clear understanding and structure to start with that causes a lot of the problems.
100%. It's a lot of times what I've seen, it's especially when you said there, it's the whole team understanding why. It's when your marketing exec has an idea of what the brand sounds like in their heads, but they don't confirm it with their manager or with the head of marketing, let alone the founder not telling the entire like team about why they started the business and what they want the business to sound like if it was a human. So
Definitely.
it's
And then if
yeah,
you multiply that as the business gets bigger and it's now potentially owned by private equity firm or shareholders, it becomes even
yeah,
more diluted. And it's amazing how often you could have a brand review which just looks at things like fonts, logos, colours, but isn't actually looking at the messaging. And often it's the messaging that lets it down.
100%, yeah. So from there, why do you think more businesses are failing with their messaging, even though there are more tools and platforms out there?
I think because if you don't have a really clear understanding of your why to start with, you're just exacerbating a problem by using tools. You're not giving a tool is only as good as the information you input into it. And if you don't know what you're putting in, you're still going to get a problem. I think that people forget about, the pain or problem they're solving for whoever they're selling to.
Yeah,
And forget that should be at the forefront of the messaging to really sound authentic and align with why someone should buy from you. And I think if you haven't got all of that stuff at the starting point, you're not going to encapsulate it into your messaging. So I think, and part of that goes back into really understanding your personas, your ideal customer, what their pain points are, what the challenges are, and then thinking about where you fit into that and what problem you're solving or what opportunity you're providing. And I think that hook is very rarely mentioned. It's very often companies' branding is very one dimensional. It's very transactional. It's kind of
yeah,
we're this consultancy that does this, and then lots of business acronym words, rather than very speaking in very straight talking language that says we will achieve this for you. And I
yeah.
think it's that overcomplication and lack of succinctness and getting to the crux of what you're offering that makes it very boring as well.
Absolutely. I often find that in the world of marketing, people often joke about the idea of IBM and how you're not supposed to use their type of messaging where you're going after that strict business exclusively upper like C-suite leaders when you're trying to communicate to your like say day-to-day marketers or day-to-day users. So
Yeah.
that idea of aligning your messaging with the right audience really is important.
Oh, so important. And I think also that's where it goes back into mapping out who isn't just your core decision maker, but who your influencers, and are you
Absolutely.
answering their questions on, say, your website or in your literature. I think also with brand messaging, like having that tone of voice and that identity gets lost as well. Like
Yeah.
what personality do you want your company to have? And I think often that's where perhaps skeptical people can think that's a lot of marketing fluff, or what on earth am I saying, and what identity? But you only
Yeah.
have to look at something like Innocent and look at how that tone of voice just absolutely smashed their marketing and brand presence because it was so
Yeah.
unique to them. Now, of course, most businesses can't have a innocent tone of voice, but they should know, you know, are we direct? Do we have more of a conservative voice? Do we sound more liberal? Like how do we want to come across? And I
Indeed.
think
Yeah.
that is really important because then it stops becoming subjective depending on who's writing within the organisation, which I think often creates such a mess,
Yeah.
and such disjointed messaging.
Which is also where the need to be consistent on every channel, whether if it's through your, I say your general employee emails and your emails, your, as you said before, your website and other forms of branding. The best example I could use is probably the rideshare company Bolt, where there's everyone often gets an email from Naomi from Bolt, and in a few social circles, it's now a running joke that it's no one is as faithful or as consistent as Naomi from Bolt because of you know how the email is going to be written, no matter what campaign that's being run. The idea of the leading with a person with the company rather than just I got this email from Uber where you're just going to dismiss it. So it's
Yeah. I think it's also where it should be aligned with sales as well, because, you know, if you're in a B2B organization, chances are you're going to need a salesperson to sell your proposition. So I guess it's also thinking about how do they represent the business? How do they show up? Because if someone's responding to carefully created messaging, which really is giving this impression, but they meet someone at real odds with that messaging, that's going to be
yeah,
quite hard to mesh in your mind. So I think again, it's really thinking about, you know, what type of personality types are you talking to? Who's representing you? Who are they going to meet? And making sure it's all, thought through.
absolutely. Which takes me on to my next question, actually.
Ah,
How
perfect.
does how does the brand notice that their messaging isn't working, and what would you say are the telltale signs? Would you say it's within in the conversions or SQLs, the engagement level, or the general sentiment around the brand?
I think it's hard to narrow it down because you could have really terrible brand messaging, but an incredible salesperson who's bucking the trend, so it is hard. But I think most people, if they're honest, stop reading what their business does. We become so used to a website or so used to literature or so used to how things appear, we actually stop scrutinizing it and thinking about it. And I think probably the best thing that anyone listening can do is just look objectively or get somebody that doesn't know their business they work for or that they own to look at it and then genuinely give them honest feedback. Because I think often it's so hard to be objective and things become, like moving wallpaper very quickly. I think there are telltale signs though. I think, there not being much noise around your business. That sometimes isn't just how you're executing your marketing, is because it's a bit boring. Or if you're not up to date with trends in your sector or how you're communicating that, it can often feel quite flat. So I think there are some telltale signs that branding is tired. But I think really the best thing to do is to almost do like a mini audit. If I didn't work here, would I be excited by what I'm reading? And try and be super objective about that.
Uh, Absolutely. Which, funny again, takes on to my next question.
Do you know what? We're getting good at this. Imagine us on episode 6.
It'll be on a roll. So when you're when you're helping a brand refine its messaging, what's your first move?
Oh, it's really getting what's giving my tricks away. I think it starts with foundations. You have to look at what your brand currently stands for. Does that align with what your customers would say about you? And then really delving a bit more into your value proposition and how that links in with your mission and your vision, and really looking at all of those three different routes, because you can't really review your messaging unless you really understand where your brand's at right now, but also the why, but also where you want it to go. And I think all of those, those three types of exercises are really important before you even do anything else. And I think probably understanding your brand as a collective is really helpful. So looking at, your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and just seeing it as a whole, because often it might be within that document or your branding exercise that you've forgotten about something that's actually super important. So I think doing groundwork is really, really important before you start any review of messaging, because otherwise you haven't really got the foundation you need to be able to checking it thoroughly anyway and looking at whether it's right.
Definitely. But from there, I then say it's during the exercise, how do you uncover the real world pain points? Because before we spoke about not understanding or the messaging not reaching the right consumer at the right time or the right person at the right time. So how do you go about uncovering the pain points where the brand, instead of doing what the brand wants to say, but actively reaching the audience with what they want to hear?
Well, I think this is where it comes into how authentic the people are in the room who are reviewing it. If you've got people who are brave and willing to be honest, you come out with a really good outcome, because you're not looking at something with rose-coloured glasses. You're actually looking at it objectively and being honest about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think that level of honesty is really, really important in order to be able to see what the opportunity is, but where perhaps there are threats coming. Because, of course, you need to write brand messaging that is future proof, that is looking ahead at what's coming. And in order to do that, you need to be aware of your threats and your opportunities. So I think, there's no quick way to get the answers without putting in the work. And that's why I think sometimes, when I do run these workshops, genuinely it is a privilege, because you sit and you hear exactly where a brand is at. And from that information, I think everybody then gets that clarity to think, okay, this is the direction we need to go in. This is the messaging we need. So I think sometimes just having people off of screens, off of email chains, off of Teams and that type of communication, and just present in a room to really look at a brand is often half the battle to get the answers you need.
Definitely. Because from there, I would ask then, once that messaging is agreed on, or once that you've got the workshop has an idea of where the messaging is, what the messaging is, and where it's going, how would you say people then could then see how to embed that into their day-to-day marketing or general organization as a whole?
Well, I guess it then goes back into your marketing strategy. How are you reaching your customers? What campaigns are you running? How's that align with sales? And really making sure that new messaging and that new branding is running through everything. You want the consistency in any brand, and that messaging is important in every brand. So I think that's where things like making sure you've got a really strong strap line, you have really strong hero statements, you have, really core USPs that pack a punch on why you. And I suppose if you have that kind of pack of tools, if you like, it's much easier to then roll that out across wider outreach mechanisms, and make sure it's aligned, because everyone knows what to include and what to reinforce.
Definitely. What guardrails would you say that a founder or a marketing leader needs to have in place for their team? Because a lot of times people would have access to those documents, but a lot of times it's also ignored and almost like third place in their mind, rather than what they should look at before doing anything.
So you mean, what should anyone think about first before they do that?
Yeah.
So I think it goes back into that objectivity, reviewing genuinely where something's at, but also empowering people around you to have a really strong voice. So make it clear that you don't want to be told everything's perfect. You want to know what people genuinely think. How do they feel some of the sales material lands when it's sent out? How do they feel? Do they feel proud of the LinkedIn presence? Do they feel proud of company literature? Like, getting a sense of how people feel the business is marketed is often really important, because often the answers are in how people communicate their excitement over brands, and that includes your people, how excited they're about what's getting out there. Because actually, when you do talk to people and they're empowered to be honest, they've often got the answers. They'll often say, actually, when we get to tender, the design of the document falls apart. It's really bad. You know, they've got all these tidbits on how the impression is affecting growth and sales and pipeline.
Yeah, which I'm guessing also helps to maintain that consistency messaging overall.
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that as soon as you start, you know, involving key people, they then almost have a stake in the project. So they feel a sense of ownership, which makes them more, you know, committed to making sure it works, that it's got the right inputs. And I think that buy-in is really important if you're doing a brand review.
Absolutely. For our viewers who may be small to medium-sized businesses or agencies like ours, what would you say are the 3 simple actions they can take today to like either carry out an audit to improve their branding or just to assess where their messaging currently is?
Well, I won't want to give any advice to agencies like ours, Alvin. So no offense to you guys, but you can turn off. For the small to medium businesses, I think it's really about thinking about your objectives. What's in your growth plan? What do you want to achieve? Thinking about your recent hurdles. What's been good? What's been bad? What's been the reoccurring theme of success? What's been a reoccurring theme of where it hasn't worked as you want it? And then being brave and doing those audits and reviews of the brand. I think it's the only way. Because if you have got a problem with your brand messaging or how you're presenting yourself, it's only ever going to get worse. So it's much better to fix it rather than pretending it's not very good. Pretending it's good rather.
Yeah, it's a lot worse to spend money on something that isn't working and you know it's not working, but it's a lot easier.
And I think it's brave, you know, it takes when someone's feeling up against the wall, and often people think about these things when there's a problem. It can feel very difficult to press pause when all you want to do is press accelerate. But sometimes that short pause actually makes you accelerate a lot quicker. And so it's important to do it.
Yeah, and in the right direction as well.
Yeah, that always helps.
Lastly, well, my last question is then for a brand operating in a crowded market, whether if it's B2B or B2C, and they're using generic messaging, but they think the messaging is generic from what they've done in that audit. What would you say are the other things they could do to stand out or to actively ensure that personality is added to their brand and their voice?
So I think an easy way to do that is to think, could what you have written be just replaced with your competitor's company name, and would it still stand up? And often generic messaging, the answer is yes, because you do the same as your competitors. And if it does stands up, that could be anyone else. You're not conveying your value proposition. So it goes back into the start of the conversation, which is, what is your why? Like every business has a difference, has a differentiator. Most businesses can't articulate that well. And it's that articulation in that messaging that is critical. So I would say if it doesn't feel unique to your business, chances are it isn't.
Absolutely. And if it's not unique to as you said, if it's not unique to the business, as we said before, why should the customer care?
They're not going to, because it's not going to stand out and give them a reason to buy you over your competitor. Then you're just hoping that you're seen rather than it being a proven strategy that gets you in front of the right people with the right messages to get results.
Indeed, which again raises the question of, do they have the right strategy in place, and does the right strategy therefore inform the right brand messaging to use or the right branding?
Yeah, and I guess I would say anyone listening where this does strike a chord, at the recent webinar, we did email out a framework to people just to get them started with some of this, you know, starting on strategy and reviews. So just drop us an email or reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can send you a framework. But I do think you're right, you know, making sure you've got the right strategy in place is key, but actually in line with what we've been talking about, really understanding your value proposition is going to be critical for your messaging.
Absolutely. Well, that is it for this week, and we'll come back next week for more.
Brilliant. Look forward to it. Can't wait.
Indeed, we'll see you then.
Thank you.